Good morning. My name is Julie Smith, and I'm the Executive Director of the Identity-Defined Security Alliance. Thanks for joining our webinar today, presented by IDSA member Centrify. The webinar is Identity-Centric PAM for Cloud and DevOps. During the discussion today, if you have questions for the presenters, please submit them through the Q&A chat window. I also want to point out that the research that was referenced in the abstract, as well as the slides for today's session, are included in the attachments section of the portal. Before I turn it over to our presenters today, I wanted to do a quick commercial for the IDSA. The IDSA is a nonprofit organization that facilitates community collaboration to help organizations reduce risk by providing education, best practices, and resources to implement identity-centric security. Our membership is comprised of leading identity and security vendors, in addition to our customer advisory board members who provide guidance on our mission and represent the practitioner community. We deliver on our mission through cross-vendor collaboration, thought leadership through research, our blog, which is populated by our members, and educational webinars like today. In addition, we develop an identity-centric security framework, which is vendor-agnostic best practices, security outcomes, and implementation approaches. I encourage you to visit our website for more information. Today's webinar, as I mentioned, is presented by Centrify. Our speakers are Brad Shoemake and Chris Owen. Brad is Director of Corporate Communications at Centrify. He uses insightful thought leadership to increase awareness about cybersecurity. He communicates Centrify's identity-centric PAM vision and news with global media, industry analysts, and customers across multiple channels. Chris joined Centrify in 2019 as Director of Product Management. He has over 15 years experience in privileged access management, having started his career at Capgemini, where he was an integral part of the team that at the time worked on the world's largest PAM deployment. Since then, Chris has worked at various PAM and identity management organizations such as Quest Software, CyberArk, where he was responsible for implementing architecture best practices, and most recently at BeyondTrust, where he led the solution engineering team across EMEA and APAC. Chris's current role takes him around the world. He speaks frequently to audiences looking to gain insight into privileged access management, and we're excited to have him here today. So with that, Brad, I'll turn it over to you to lead the discussion.
Great, thank you, Julie, and good morning, everybody. And just want to extend a quick thank you to Julie and the IDSA for allowing Centrify to use this channel to speak with everyone today. So thank you very much. Just a couple quick housekeeping items. One, you'll notice on the right-hand side of your screen, there should be an area where you can enter questions that you have for Chris or I as we move through the webinar. Please submit them as we go, and Chris and I will do our best to keep this conversational and address those in real time as best we can. If not, then the rest of them we will try to answer at the end if we have time, and if we don't, then we will try and address those via email as a follow-up item. And again, to reiterate what Julie said, there are some resources available as well, including these slides that Chris and I will be going through for the next 40 minutes or so. So really quickly, as many of you are probably aware, it is National Cybersecurity Month here in the US, and we've got 2 more days left in October. So it's a fitting time to have this webinar. And you know, as everybody knows, organizations across all industries, you know, even those that have traditionally lagged or been resistant to it, they're now moving to cloud. And the reality is that many of them are moving to multi-cloud. And obviously, there are availability and scalability gains that are extremely attractive, especially as we're in a pandemic where there's broadly distributed remote workforces. But also, as people are accelerating their move to cloud, that's also creating some confusion. So we'll address some of that. In the meantime, you know, we have DevOps, and these teams, they want to be agile, they want to move quickly, and sometimes that means that they want to try and skip over security. So we're going to talk a little bit about DevOps today with regards to privileged access management and how PAM can be, as much as possible, automated into both cloud security and DevOps. So it's built in and as easy for everybody so that you don't lose productivity, you don't lose agility, but you can increase security. So with that, that's a short intro. I'm going to turn it over to Chris Owen. Chris?
Thank you very much, Brad. And once again, thank you, Julie, and the IDSC for hosting us today. So really what we're talking about today is the adoption and rise of cloud technologies, and then what we can do from a DevOps, DevSecOps point of view to secure that access. And really, this is coined under the umbrella of digital transformation, right? And it's driving cloud adoption faster than we've ever seen before. And of course, the global pandemic that we're all going through at the moment has really led to an increase in cloud adoption as many organizations transition to this new remote way of working and how to gain, kind of as Brad mentions, efficiencies, scalability, cost savings, benefits. If we look at the stats for cloud adoption over the next couple of years, it's thought that by 2024, 90% of global 1,000 organizations are going to have multi-cloud management strategies. And really what that means is kind of taking it a step further from where many organizations are now who are dipping their toes into cloud technologies. They may select one particular vendor, whether it be Microsoft Azure, whether it be GCP or AWS, and it broadens that to say, okay, a lot of organizations are going to have multi-cloud strategies where they may take certain components from different vendors based on best-in-class, best-of-breed technologies. Along with that, 93% of organizations are really storing sensitive data in the cloud now, and there's been various different bits of research done, whether it be by Forrester, by Gartner, and it all points to the fact that cloud adoption is growing, but so is our risk exposure. And one of the most scary stats really on this page is, looking at the stat for through 2023, at least 99% of cloud security failures are going to be the customer's fault. And as a security professional, that scares the life out of me because, our attack surface is already greatly expanded. Cyber adversaries have a lot more time on their hands than what we do, and they can spend days, weeks, months, probing for gaps. So hopefully throughout the rest of this session, what you'll take away is really some best practices of how we can evolve our privileged access management strategies to really look after the new breed of threats that we're seeing when it comes to cloud security. And then finally on here, businesses are ultimately still responsible for the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your data in the cloud. And I think most of us are aware of this in reality, but it's always a good reminder, especially when we just went through the previous statistic, that we are responsible for protecting our data in the cloud. The cloud provider is responsible for the platform and providing that to us. But that's the reason why 99% of cloud security failures are thought to be attributed to ourselves, the customer's fault. And Brad, I don't know whether you've got any insight that you can share on some of these as well.
Yeah, I think that one thing that's interesting is as we were prepping for this webinar, we actually had an older stat down in that bottom left quadrant, and I think the number was 95% through 2020. So clearly, this is a Gartner stat from a fantastic report, by the way. You can see we've got it referenced there. Centrify actually has this report available for free on our website if you want to go get it. I can see if we can maybe in real time here add it into this as a resource for this webinar as well. But yeah, it truly is a terrifying stat. And again, a lot of it comes around to confusion, right? So, some of these industries, especially who have been resistant or hesitant to move to the cloud, now suddenly feel like they're behind and they want to move very quickly. But as they're doing that, there's confusion, right? They don't know where the responsibility lies in this shared responsibility model. A lot of them might think that all of the security is the responsibility of the cloud security provider, and that's just, the cloud provider, and that is just not the case at all. So, Chris, you've already touched on the shared responsibility model, but I think obviously a lot of it starts with understanding of what the shared responsibility model is, and that will hopefully help to over time knock down that 99% stat that Gartner predicts. So that it at least gets down so we don't have 99 out of 100 organizations having customer faulted security failures.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be fairly terrifying, and I'm pretty sure unjust as well. And that's really where privileged access management comes in, right? We know privilege is at the heart of the majority of breaches that are out there. Attackers can't do bad things if they don't have privileges, don't have rights. And when we think about traditional privileged access management, it really focused on protecting the data center. You know, all of our assets were contained within bricks and mortar, and we were in full control of security, authentication, and really as organizations embraced cloud, that kind of changed. It changed everything. You know, we joked about it on a blog that we did and said, you know, cloud changed everything. And unfortunately, recently it turned to COVID changed everything. But when we look at the adoption of cloud and what happened, you know, I remember working in a previous company about 10 years ago. And we did this huge shift to cloud, and it was literally a lift and shift. You know, we took all of the servers that we had in our data center, we moved them to a hosting provider, and we quickly backed out of it, right? And I think a lot of organizations have done this when they embrace cloud. You take what you've got, you shift it into the cloud, and then you quickly realize, hold on, I've gained zero here. You know, I may not have a building cost anymore, but I'm not realizing any scalability benefits, any cost savings, or anything like that. So as organizations matured their cloud environments, you know, they started to redesign for elasticity. And this is where you have terminology such as infrastructure as code. And what that really means is that we are provisioning infrastructure, provisioning what used to be a server as, you know, compute in a public cloud platform. And then we'll leverage things such as auto scaling, where we can shrink or grow that infrastructure and compute environment based on need, you know, based on requirement, as our services become more kind of busy. And, you know, the final stage, and some organizations are adopting this now, is really the replatforming of our applications for containers. And this is really a drive towards agility. And some organizations have started, they're dipping their toes in the water with, you know, container technology, whether it be Kubernetes, you know, Docker and things like that. But I would say the majority of organizations are kind of in the middle of this picture, you know, really still looking at elasticity and trying to think about containers, but that is a major shift. And Brad, I think it's something that we're seeing, right? This huge rise in cloud adoption, and I know you've been kind of tracking some metrics in this area as well.
Yeah, we have actually. So Centrify does quite a bit of survey research. We actually have one that we just announced at the beginning of this month. And what the survey found was a survey of over 200 U.S. business decision makers, and that found that 48% of organizations have accelerated their cloud migrations in the past 7 months as a result of the pandemic. Now, what was interesting about that was if you look at the data and break it down by enterprises with 500 or more employees, that number jumps from 48% to 73%. So clearly, the larger enterprises, large companies, who, you know, may have been in any kind of place in their cloud transformation journey, they're all, you know, for the most part, 3 out of 4, they're all accelerating those journeys. They're accelerating those cloud migrations. And so, as Chris said, you know, for a lot of those larger companies, they're probably going to land somewhere in that middle phase that Chris went through, these 3 phases. But clearly, you know, for some smaller organizations that may not be as far along that path, they might still be in that lift and shift mode. So, but interesting to see that clearly there is data there that shows that, you know, hey, it's a new way of working. It's a new there's new requirements for our workforce, new requirements for our partners and customers. We've got to accelerate this move to cloud.
Absolutely. And you know, one of the interesting things, you know, as our organizations adopt cloud technology, as we embrace new ways of working and new technologies, the exciting part is that our staff are also transitioning as well, and they're learning new technologies. It's exciting because it's great that people gain new skill sets. It's great that people get to progress their career. And it gives us some challenges from a security point of view, but we really have to look at, you know, security being an enabler at this point. But, you know, if you look back to the good old days, as I like to call them, you know, I remember working in a data center once, and it was a large migration project from Windows NT4 up into, you know, Server 2003 with Active Directory. So we had to spend a lot of time in a data center building servers. And in those days, you know, you had, first of all, change control. you had physical security. You'd walk up to the data center, you'd have your RFID card to get in. You'd be met by a data center ops person. They'd check all your details and all the change control. They'd escort you to a server. And sometimes they'd even stand behind you and watch what you do on that server. But if you look at our transition to the cloud, this has completely changed. And I'm a little bit old school. I miss going up to a server rack and hugging the servers and keeping warm. But now our data center can be accessed with a password, and that from a pure security point of view, that's scary. From a technology point of view, it is fantastic. But there's definitely, I call them a new breed of IT ops staff under the umbrella of kind of DevOps, and there's also DevSecOps and SecDevOps. It can be a bit confusing. But we're now deploying infrastructure as code and are definitely acting in a more agile way. And we're trusting these staff to build security into their process in order to enable agility, really, with rapid time to value. So our staff are transitioning, our data centers and our cloud are transitioning, and there's a whole raft of new technologies that are now being introduced into our environments. And, frankly, as a central security team, we cannot possibly know all these tools, how they work, what security gaps are in them. And I think the old model of centralizing security operations isn't as effective as what it used to be. And of course, that's not to say that a central security team isn't needed. It absolutely is. But the role of security is constantly changing and definitely should now be seen as an enablement function to really assist our new staff kind of building security into their workloads. And there's varying different layers to this. The slide here has a typical DevOps environment, as I call it, and the pure number of programs, platforms, etc., is quite daunting. But this is the world that we live in now, and right the way up from virtual infrastructure, which simply used to be VMware. We've now got AWS, Azure, Rackspace, GCP, etc. We've then got across the operating system layer, all of the major players that you would expect to see, plus some new ones, container Linux, for instance. We're seeing a lot more applications designed to run in Dockers, containers, and then of course you've got an orchestration layer on top of that, a platform layer, and then you've got the CI/CD pipeline, so tools talking to tools in order to do this work. So there's a lot of change that organizations are having to deal with, a lot of new technologies that are being adopted. Some are being adopted, at a rapid pace, and sometimes, COVID is a prime driver of that. As we change our environments, we're changing our applications at the same time. Cloud has been a great enabler for a whole wave of new authentication mechanisms, as we try and consolidate identity. So now we've got web standards, things like SAML tokens, OAuth tokens, OpenID Connect, that really enables us to centralize authentication onto a single identity and provide that to cloud applications. Now, as we embrace cloud technology, and as we think about privileged access management as a whole and how it fits into this, there are really some key challenges, key use cases that we've got to look to address. And we're not going to sit here and say privileged access management has been an easy thing for organizations to adopt and implement over the last 15 years or so. It's had its challenges for a lot of organizations. And some have struggled with adoption. Some of that has been, how do you sell it to your internal user base? Some has been, how do we position it in a way that we're not taking things away from our user base? And now we've got to think about what are the new ways of working? What are the new things that we've got to kind of protect? So some of the key use cases for privileged access management when we think about DevOps is really, how do we protect access to the management consoles? How do we protect programmatic access to them? So command line APIs, things like that. How do we protect the CI/CD pipeline? So tools talking to tools. How are we protecting infrastructure and workloads? It's a little bit different to how we'd protect I guess, servers compute within a data center. And then what are we doing around secrets and then app-to-app authentication? So we're gonna look at these use cases one by one and kind of give you some suggestions and things that really you should be looking to do.
Yeah, Chris, I love it. Let's get into some of these specifics, because I think there's a lot of things we can go over here. I mean, as I think about this first kind of challenge that we're looking at, one of the things that comes to mind here on this topic is, each cloud provider has their own, obviously they have their own best practices, right, around, and specifically around securing root accounts, for example. And so that can include enabling MFA at the cloud provider level. But when you move to a vault, most solutions then, they can't manage these passwords unless you remove the MFA that you set up on the cloud administrative console. So just to kick this particular topic off, how do you resolve that?
Yeah, absolutely, and a really good point there. When you sign up to a cloud platform, your first account is always root. You go through a series of best practices, and generally it finishes with enabling MFA through that platform, and really that sets the lock on the front door. Now, if you're going to manage AWS root as an example with a vault automatically reaches out. It may use an API, CLI, or other kind of mechanisms, but it can't deal with an MFA prompt. And that's a major problem for vaults, because vaults will come in, they'll tell you, remove MFA, you've got MFA on the vault, and problem solved. But for me, you're taking the lock off the front door and your last kind of security control, so it's a little bit risky. What you'll generally find, and this is the route we've gone down as a vendor, we do what's called an assisted password change. So we will actually get you to the front door of AWS. We'll do all the form fill, we'll manage the password, but we'll actually take a pause and then prompt a user to enter the MFA as part of that password change process. And there's lots of notifications and things so you know when that needs to happen. But if you think about the challenge, these cloud management consoles are full access to the data center essentially, and it's using a password. And at the same time that humans have access, DevOps tools and pipelines also have access, whether it be via API, CLI. So the things that you want to do is certainly manage those credentials in a vault, make sure that you're auditing any kind of access to those management consoles, and maintain the infrastructure as a service provider best practices. And that's really for admin access. When it comes to staff, when it comes to users, federation is key, right? The last thing that you want is identity silos being spun up, somebody going into, Azure, creating local users, same with GCP and AWS IAM users, etc. Tie them all into whatever your directory may be, avoid the identity silo problem. You can also do host-based auditing on end users' workstations. So any time that they have browser access to one of these cloud compute platforms, you can fully track what it is they're doing. More pertinent with admin access though, rather than standard users. Now, the next challenge comes with programmatic access. So when you think about automation and really, what most people think of as DevOps, it's scripts, orchestration services, other tools that have, API, command line access to those cloud platforms itself. So some of the basic controls that we should be doing here is really managing those service accounts and access keys. Again, vaulting is ideal for this. And then allowing scripts and orchestration tools to programmatically access these accounts and keys. So you can either do that via what's called an AAPM, application to application password management, so allowing the scripts and programs to programmatically retrieve them from the vault, play them into the target system, or again, you look to leverage federation, which really ensures secure control over the authentication process. If you use federation, you eliminate the need for service accounts and their static credentials, so a major kind of security benefit in doing that. Now, next up, we're going to look at the pipeline itself. And much like the previous example, this one goes a step further, really, and focuses on tool-to-tool or application-to-application credential management. And usually when we talk about a pipeline, it's established between tools and requires authenticated access to run application scripts which you never want to contain hard-coded credentials. So the solution here is really, when it comes to application password management, you're vaulting the credentials. Ideally, don't have them static, utilize ephemeral tokens where possible, and really don't create additional front doors. This is a really interesting point. And it's the point of application-to-application password management is a difficult subject. It's one of the hardest parts of a PAM program. And there's some serious, I guess, security concerns with how people do this. I guess, Brad, we can talk a little bit about the AAPM approach that typically, PAM vendors kind of have, and what we do that's a little bit different here.
Yeah, I mean, application password management, or AAPM. I mean, it's not new. It's not like a new acronym, and there are definitely traditional approaches to AAPM that I think, Chris, we can maybe talk a little bit more. But also, I think that there's clearly a desire in the market to see some more modern approaches to AAPM. And I know that we have one in particular, Chris, that maybe you could touch on, which is our delegated machine credentials capability in our privileged access service.
Yeah, sure. So so when you look at AAPM historically, what happens is you vault credentials, you have a script, you have a workload that needs to retrieve them. So you remove the hard-coded embedded credentials from the script, you replace it with a call to the vault. Now, in order to make that call, your script needs to talk to the vault to retrieve it. So you have a username, password, and an API key, usually that your modified script contains. And the reality of that is, yep, you've moved your privileged account into the vault, but you've now created a doorway and you've left the credentials in that doorway, or the key in that doorway. So you're creating all of these entry points into your vault, and you'll have them distributed on lots and lots of application servers. So that for me doesn't really solve the problem. Well, one of the really cool things that our engineering team came up with was the concept of DMC, or delegated machine credentials, as it's called. And this works really well in a cloud world, right? As soon as a cloud workload is provisioned, it can actually enroll itself with our platform. And we think of that enrollment, very similar to what you had when you do things like MDM, mobile device management. You'll join a company, you'll enroll your mobile in the MDM platform. It has a bunch of security policies applied. Well, we can do that with servers and workloads. So you spin up something in AWS, it registers itself in our platform. And we use, under the covers, OAuth 2 tokens, and we can use scope tokens as well. But we ultimately then trust that machine. So there's a certificate exchange that goes on. We trust that machine, and we allow that machine or the application to then speak to our vault without needing the username, password, API key. So much stronger form of authentication under the covers, and it solves the problem of AAPM because it doesn't require you to create privileges or holes or backdoors into your vault. So huge, kudos to the team when they came up with that. I think it's a fantastic innovation in the world of AAPM, and something that I expect others to follow with, as soon as they start looking at how it works. Now, we just spoke a little bit around workloads, infrastructure, and when we think about this, a lot of us think of compute, a lot of us think of servers. So many of us will think about traditional privileged access management controls and some of the tools, technologies that we can actually use here. But actually, cloud workloads are a little bit different. When we create servers, containers, they're really our most granular security boundary. And these are often ephemeral in nature. Typically we know what's in our data center. We know how many servers of which type. But in the cloud world, where you use things like auto scaling, they will spin up, they'll spin down. They're very dynamic in nature. So installing, big agents on them, having policy pushed out to them to control privilege, doesn't really work very well in a model where your workloads are not static. So really, the solution to this is one, what we just spoke about with the delegated machine credential. Allow machines to enroll within the PAM platform and trust them as soon as they are provisioned. 2, as part of that process, you can automatically and dynamically vault any accounts that they've got. Enable just-in-time access, and JIT is a relatively new model in the world of privilege. You know, we've been speaking about JIT for the past couple of years, but that does make it new in the world of privilege. And really, just-in-time access, and also just enough, is only allow access as and when it's required, and sometimes with approval processes, etc. But it's granted just in time, so removing static access to systems. And then the final point here is really on MFA. You know, MFA is a very important security control, as we're all aware, but a lot of people just have it at the front of their privileged access management solution. And actually most sessions that you see are not always initiated via a PAM tool. People go round a vault, people log on direct, and that's okay. You know, you shouldn't necessarily force all users through a vault, because that's when you get into trouble in fundamentally changing how users operate. So by applying MFA everywhere, or in this case, you know, upon system logon, you're putting a further kind of barrier in place for the threat actor.
Yeah, Chris, really quickly before you move on, you know, I think that point about enabling just-in-time access is worth drilling into a little bit more. I mean, this really comes into play as we start talking about the concept of least privilege, right? So it's more than just authentication. It's how do we make sure that we are only granting just enough access for just the amount of time needed to complete the task, and then removing those privileges so there are no standing privileges. That's really what's at the core of the least privilege concept, and goes a long way to ensuring that you're closing some of these doors that the threat actors would seek to walk right through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit on a really good point there, which was the zero standing privilege model. You know, one of the things that has happened historically in privileged access management is the concept of standing privilege. And it's a bizarre thing, because you implement a least privilege tool to take away privileges, or to only grant the relevant privileges to people, I should say, if we're selling this in the right way. But actually, those least privilege policies are completely static. So if somebody compromises my account, they've still got all the privileges that I have that are being managed by a PAM tool. So the concept of JIT was really coined to grant just-in-time access on a just enough basis. So JIT and JEA are the kind of terms that you'll likely see across the industry. But as Brad mentions, you know, it does away with standing privilege, grants just enough access only when it's needed to systems. We then come into one of the most common things that we get asked about, which is about, you know, secrets management. And most people think of secrets as either bits of code or as certificates or tokens and things like that. But a secret could be anything in reality. It could be configuration data. It could be all of the things that we mentioned before, of your certificates, tokens, API keys, etc. So you definitely need somewhere to store these. You'd want some kind of central storage vault for them. And actually, all of the major cloud platforms actually have secrets management capabilities built in. I guess our one bit of advice, you know, we are here as a vendor, and we have a password vault solution, is you can get into a little bit of trouble, you know, if you start utilizing secrets management capabilities natively within the cloud platforms. You can very much have a disjointed and siloed approach to privilege management if you start consuming secrets management from Azure, AWS, GCP, and then you have a password vault on top of that, you know, regardless of the vendor. All of a sudden, you've got 4 different vaults to manage, to secure, to ensure that there's consistent policies across. So traditionally, what you'll see across the PAM world is really vendors that are consolidating these into a single offering to really give you that kind of central platform that does everything for you. But secrets management is really at the heart of cloud, because secrets are used everywhere and through all of the tools that you're likely to see in this world. Now, really the final bit is app-to-app authentication. And this is a little bit different to app-to-app credential management. And this is really focused on the fact that modern applications are ultimately requiring access to other application services on the hosted platforms that they reside in, or data storage services. So if you think about designing applications, in a legacy world, you typically have, a web tier, a data tier, etc. So in a typical 3-tier architecture, those components need to talk to each other. And when you architect, applications in the modern cloud world, you're leveraging services of the cloud platforms, you'll be doing web development yourselves. So tokenization and authentication are really key here, and the common technologies are really OAuth, OpenID Connect, or SAML that we see most of the time. So we've got to allow applications to retrieve these tokens, and one of the things that we can do is actually generate these tokens as a platform and really allow then applications to consume them. And because we're trusting the machine that hosts that application, we can allow them to retrieve them securely and without needing additional credentials to do that. So they're really the 6 key use cases that you look to protect. And one of the great things about us doing this kind of webinar in conjunction with IDSA is really the identity-centric conversation. And it really plays a big part in privileged access management. I think historically we're very much focused on data-centric security in a world of data centers, and that really focuses on applying protection to data. And rather than trying to protect data in specific locations, even, whether you're on a laptop, specific network, the goal is really there to protect sensitive data, wherever it goes, using policy-based protection that prevents unauthorized users from accessing it. And typical technologies that you'd see are, data discovery, classification, encryption, tokenization, data masking type of solutions. And identity and access management, it has always been a part of data-centric security, but it's not the foundation of it. An identity-driven approach really focuses on identifying individuals or things in a system and controlling access to resources within that system. And the goal is to ensure that the right people access the right information at the right time. The typical technologies that you'd see here include identity and access management solutions, or IAM solutions as we know them, identity governance, IGA tools, access management, and privileged access management fits into an identity-centric security model too. And the arguments for this approach share some of the similarities in reality to data-centric security. So, an example of this is that a new security approach is needed in a zero trust environment where no one can be trusted by default. Zero trust is never trust, always verify. However, advocates for identity-centric security say that identity, not data, is the common denominator in increasingly complex kind of networks and really should be used as the core of all trust. And another thing that the identity-centric approach says that is really, if you don't know who or what is requesting access, then no other security method really matters. And I'm not sure whether I 100% agree with that. I think we've always been taught defense in depth, but it is true that you can have the best data encryption, application security, but if the wrong identity gains access to that data or application, that effort's kind of fruitless. And there are a number of reasons why identity has become increasingly important in the last few years, and I guess identities have evolved far beyond humans. We're now systems, APIs, applications, etc. And really, identity continues to be at the root of most headline-grabbing data breaches. They all involve privileged access in reality. So very important.
Yeah, Chris, I think that's an important point. And on the previous slide, actually, when you're talking about Cloud PAM for app-to-app authentication, you had a bullet on there that's talked about how we can remove the need to create additional privileged accounts. And as you start to think about identities, and you mentioned this already, Chris, which is, now we're seeing this, the exponential kind of explosion in identities isn't happening at the human level. It's starting at the machine, application, and service level, right? So the more and more that we can remove the need to create those additional privileged accounts for those identities, the more potential doors or entryways in we're going to be shutting.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the, I guess, fallacies of password vaulting. I remember my first vault project that I did when I was a customer. It was in 2001. And I implemented this password vault, and it could only actually manage 3 accounts. That was it. It could manage root, administrator, and SA. And that was all this vault did. And I'll tell you what, it was a fantastic vault. It was highly successful. I used it in about 3 projects that I did, and every single one was successful. 2 years after that, in 2003, vaults really became commercial. A bunch of new vendors entered the market in the password vault space. And I can honestly say, as soon as vaults were able to manage more accounts, what I actually found is organizations I was working with ended up creating more privilege than they actually managed. And that trend's continued. Vaults have evolved, they've become more complex, but at the same time, you've needed more privilege in order for the vaults to work. So you ended up exploding and creating additional privileged accounts. So I really, we'll come onto it in a sec when we talk about agents, but I embrace agents, in a cloud world, because agents remove the need for you to create additional privileged accounts, whether that be for password reconciliation purposes or AAPM purposes. But we need to look at this pragmatically and from a security perspective, that vaults aren't the be all and end all. They are very important. They do a very good job, but they don't secure everything. So definitely you need to look at and embrace other technologies around the side of a vault in order for it to be effective. And agents is one of the ways that you do that. So ultimately, when we look at identity-centric privilege management and really, what Centrify provides here, if we think about the challenges that we just spoke about, organizations are complex. A lot of us have data centers, a lot of us are embracing cloud technologies, and at the same time, we're embracing multiple cloud technologies or multi-cloud strategies. So really, what we as a vendor look to do is really centralize privileged access management for these heterogeneous environments and hybrid environments. So we want to give you, a centralized solution for managing credential secrets. When we think about authentication, identity, think about how you transition from a data center into a cloud platform and into, cloud compute. So you want to take your Active Directory identity with you. You want to log on to cloud resources as yourself. And federation is really at the heart of that. At the same time, we've now got applications utilizing service accounts, APIs. So again, we act as the centralized kind of broker for those. And a couple of neat things is multi-factor authentication. We spoke about that, how important that is as a control. So, as part of our platform, we are an MFA provider, and we can broker that MFA to these disparate kind of environments and cloud environments. What we have seen a rise in, and Brad, I think you'll agree here, is certainly the global pandemic has really driven the need for remote access solutions. And one of the things that we realized very early on is, the way in which we architected our solution here, it provides that secure remote access without the need for a VPN. And VPNs have their place. They're very good for corporate access. But when it comes to privilege, it's kind of like digging an underground tunnel into a prison and then not having any visibility of what's going on inside that tunnel. So certainly, remote access, secure remote access without the need for a VPN, where a PAM solution is providing the credentials, is something that we've seen huge and exponential growth in throughout this year. Brad, would you agree there?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that's really, really important to be mindful of here is, a lot of times when you think about administrators, a lot of them are third parties, right? So you'll have third party access where you don't want to give those people just a complete, as Chris said, an open tunnel into the prison, right? So And that's, oftentimes that's been a concern, has been those third parties. But now with, even your employee IT administrators all working remotely, well, now you've got, even more people who are trying to use that open tunnel. So the way that we can actually secure remote access without a VPN really does provide for a more secure way for ITs to continue to have the access they need, but not, just grant full, whole hog access to the entire network.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the interesting points here, and we'll come on to it in the next one, is, from an infrastructure point of view, privileged access management has traditionally been complex. Organizations have required a lot of infrastructure. Typically on-prem, there's been a large number of servers, very high performance servers. Third-party licensing has been a common thing we've seen as well. And really, the new wave of PAM tools that have been out there for the past kind of 5 years or so have kind of changed things. Many are now doing a cloud-first strategy. And we're no different. Obviously, we're not the only vendor in the PAM space. There's a lot of great vendors who do what we do with a lot of great technology. But we're really, when we look to what sets us apart, I think a couple of things for me. The platform approach is key when it comes to privileged access management. Nobody wants, distributed siloed tooling anymore. Everybody's looking to do vendor consolidation, tool consolidation to realize cost savings, etc. And I think we're in a great place here. We are not ashamed to say that we're the only, I guess, PAM leader, in the leaders quadrant of the Gartner Magic Quadrant that hasn't made acquisitions. And you can look at that negatively and say, okay, what's your kind of growth strategy? But I actually look at that in a really positive way, right? Because we've got a fully homegrown solution that we've built ourselves that fits in the one platform, that fully talks, all of the components talk to each other, and it's modular. You just pick up the capabilities that you want to consume, and they will all work together. So I think that really works in our favor. It definitely enables our customers to look at focusing their efforts on tool consolidation as well. We are seeing a lot of, I guess, replacement programs starting to take place. People that adopted PAM maybe 10 years ago that went with a more kind of on-premise, old vault structure, are thinking about transitioning to the cloud. So they come to us, looking for a SaaS provided solution there. And that's really where we shine, right? We built this solution cloud first. We built it in Azure, transitioned it to AWS, so we run across both platforms. And as it mentions, we are hyper scalable. And what does that really mean? Well, our cloud solution, our SaaS solution will grow as our customer base does. We've got an excellent ops team, and we eat our own dog food, to put it in a polite way. So we utilize all of the kind of controls that we've just been speaking about, to really grow our platform and to do it in a secure way. At the same time, cloud may not be for everybody when it comes to security. So that same cloud architecture that we've built, we actually utilize the same architecture for our customers who want to deploy this themselves. So we've taken all of the great kind of cloud technologies, whether that be kind of Redis cache, whether it be fast databases, our cloud client, etc. And we enable people to deploy that within their own environment, whether that be private cloud or even on-prem. And then the concept of hub and spoke. So if we go back to privileged access management tools of old, you'd potentially have a minimum of 8 big servers, but it's very rare you'd see 8. The largest I've seen has been around 86 servers, of huge footprint. And tools aren't designed like that anymore. If we take our SaaS Vault platform, all you need to deploy in your environment are these tiny little connectors. You distribute them in each infrastructure as a service provider, in each VPC. If you want to put them on-prem to manage them on-prem, then you do that. But these connectors now are phenomenal in terms of the work that they provide and the things that they do. So they act as the proxy for you. They'll do SSH sessions, RDP sessions. They'll act as the MFA broker, but they're also an API proxy, a certificate proxy, discovery engine, a change engine, all in a little bit of code that you can just drop onto existing workload and compute. So phenomenal how these things are designed now. And I mentioned it a while ago, we're proud that we're agent-based. It says here client-based, and clients have so many benefits when it comes to privilege. The reality is having an agent is the only way to really manage privilege. Otherwise you're doing it as an abstraction layer on top of the operating system, and you can always circumvent that. So our cloud client and our on-prem clients, they're really clever. They can enroll systems into our platform. That way you've got what we call the root of trust there, meaning that we're trusting the identity of the machine, and we can then enable workloads and enable automation. It enables you to do granular host-based access control, so enforcing least privilege. And then at the same time, it can record everything on that host, so locally. If you think about traditional password vault solutions that have a proxy, yep, that proxy will record all your sessions, and we can absolutely do all of that, by the way. But what if somebody goes around the vault? What if somebody doesn't check out credentials or log through a proxy? How do you then know what they're doing? You're then in a really tricky situation where you're trying to correlate logs and reliant on SIM tools. So host-based session monitoring and termination is a really important control to have in the future. And Brad, I'm not sure whether you've got anything that you think really sets us apart as an organization, maybe?
Well, I think that's a good advertisement for Centrify. One of the things that I always love to talk about with regards to our solution is with regards to that multi-cloud architecture. So again, our solution was developed in the cloud for the cloud. And we actually were the first PAM vendor to offer PAM as a service. So the deployment options that we make available, I think, are unparalleled in the industry. And again, that does set us apart when you do start talking about things like cloud security and DevOps, where that cloud architecture and those deployment options really do come into play.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Chris, I think that wraps up our slides, and thank you for the thorough run through. I think we have 8 minutes left, and I know that everyone appreciates some extra time if we have it, but if you do have any questions at this time, please do put those into the Q&A field. I do see that we've had one come in here. So we have a question, Chris, about the issue of an individual having multiple identities used in context. And how they may not be known as the same moniker, or I assume that means the same identity within varying contexts. And so I guess I don't really see a question here per se, but the comment is, most assume that this will be handled by isolating the authentication systems, but there's more overlap of context that could create more conflicts. So how do we address it? I don't know if that's clear enough.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and I think the analogy is actually really good in that. If you're at home on social media, networks, etc., you've got different identities on a system, and some will be personal, some will be work related. In a work context, you may have multiple identities in a work context. And it's an interesting challenge to have, especially when you come to tokenization of authentication. I think if I log on to my Office 365, my work identity, it says, do I want to remain logged in? Well, yes, until the point when I want to go and check my Outlook.com email, and it does a similar thing. I've got different tokens running. So yes, we have solved some of that. I'm not going to say we're 100% there. But specifically when it comes to to work identities, we've done a lot of work on identity consolidation, obviously starting out in the Unix, Linux space, consolidating into Active Directory there. But our cloud client gives us what we call identity broker capabilities and allows you to take your identity with you into these cloud platforms. So we've got a really neat capability, for instance, it's called Use My Account. So you can point to the cloud system and just say, log me on using my account. And that can be your current logged in authenticated user, or it can be a secondary alternate account that we can actually map to you as a user. There are still things that I think, are to be done in that area. So I'd be really interested, if you've got further feedback, please feel free to reach out to us as a follow-up and kind of let us know your thoughts on what we could potentially do to make that life better or that use case better. But at the moment where we are is identity consolidation, Unix, Linux into AD, identity brokering, allowing you to take your AD or your directory identity with you into the cloud world and into cloud workloads, and then the Use My Account kind of capability.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example to bring up, Chris. I mean, really what this all comes around to at a very macro level is how can we simplify and secure access using both the tools that people are familiar with and just simplifying it, for example, Use My Account. So, I think that's kind of the crux of what we're getting to here is, and you actually mentioned this exact phrase earlier, Chris, which is, it's not just about throwing up roadblocks, it's about making security an enabler, right? So that's really what we're looking to do is enable the productivity and agility and all the things that people want, but then also making sure that security is built in, automated as much as possible, and just make it easier. All right, just a quick scan here to see if we have any more questions. I don't believe that we have any that have come in. So with that, just a quick thank you again to everybody for joining us today. Thank you to Julie and the IDSA for hosting us and giving this opportunity to share some of our identity-centric PAM approaches to cloud and DevOps. And again, just as a reminder, we do have some resources available to you. So please, it includes the presentation deck that we just went through. So please go, feel free to go and download those. And I believe we'll also have a link to those available in the follow-up email that you'll receive as well. So thanks again for joining everyone today. Thank you, Chris. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks a lot, everyone.